You can take a photo of the back of someone's book, plug it into ChatGPT, and ask it to generate the entire novel. One reason that you wouldn't want to do this is to relate to the fans of that book. You might like your version better, but you can't talk about it with anyone. You can make new media with it, or you can share a link to it. When you meet another fan of someone else's work, the three of you create a plane. 3 points define a plane. The normal vector points perpendicularly. Perpendicular? The normal vector is perpendicular to this plane. 3 points on an infinitely large sphere resemble a plane. There's probably a better way to phrase that. With calculus, you can take a 2D differential from a 3D object. So when you meet another fan of someone's work, when you create that triangle with you, a creator, and someone else who is a fan, you and the other fan can integrate your experience to create an emergent point. From that emergent point, you could create more content. There are YouTubers who do this. I believe there's a mathematician who in the 80s created something called The Game of Life, which is a single player game, no player, zero player game. From an initial seed, you can create a computer depending on how you configure the board. I'd recommend looking that up. It's a cellular automaton. Automaton? This video is unscripted. Today is January 9th and the US has 10 more days of TikTok. While we have access to this medium, look through its features. These will pop up in other places. Learn to use them. Red light has longer wavelength than blue light. Conservative states are going to behave more like a binary computer than blue states. The people who design American political theater are aware of this. Homeostatic systems with self-awareness tend to become more quantum. Globalization reshapes the boundaries we can imagine. I would recommend learning structured language like HTML, or XML or SVG. Code is also useful. I would recommend learning Rust for systems programming and JavaScript for everyday programming. To relate to the core computer science fundamentals, I would recommend learning C. These days, you need 5 years of experience to become a software engineer. Or you can do whatever you're doing and just code. You are allowed to be a business person who knows how to code. This is 3 frames of an animated website. This is meant to be 13 components for an animated website. 13 times 3 is 39. Imagine how much paper would be necessary for me to animate this website. Imagine clicking on something and dragging it to the opposite side of the page. How would I predict which direction someone drags any of these components? By the end of 2025, I want a hand-animated website. I want to draw 1 frame per day. I hope my website naturally has 365 frames. I'm allowing myself to use AI in this process, but where would I? That's the important thing. Where in this process would I use AI? If my goal is to be relatable, then I want to make sure that I'm using AI in the right places. I own factshift.com and I use it for show production. You can lay out your concepts, screenshot them, upload that screenshot to ChatGPT, and then extend that screenshot with other applications. Because I actively use this software to communicate with other creatives, I want to make sure that it's done well. If you're seeing this, you're one of the few people who know what I'm doing with this technology. I've also described it in other places, but that's boring and most people aren't going to try to access that context. So you know that I've spent the past 2 years working on this particular interface, and you can kind of see what the direction is going to be. You can make a similar application, and you can learn the one that I've created. In college, during the electrical engineering curriculum, our math classes taught us about exponents. Exponents are necessary for higher orders of math. As we have conversations about quantum mechanics and different dimensions, it's a good idea to have some sort of emotional connection to multivariable calculus. When you form this kind of relationship to exponents, the kinds of software that you design change. I'm trying to design software for after thousands of companies invest hundreds of millions or billions of dollars into AI. I am not going to be able to do anything more advanced necessarily in that regard. I can emphasize consistency in the domains that I practice. The domain that I've been practicing has been incrementally building an ecosystem that other people understand and can implement themselves. I've also been transparently describing how I built this ecosystem, the reasons that I've made these decisions, and the context is available. Through 2025, I'm going to be reflecting on 2024 and bringing all of that content into a more polished, streamlined format. I will be using AI, and you can see where I do that, why I would do that, which decisions I want to highlight, and which relationships with art and creativity and other creatives I try to foster. Do something daily. Also, you can learn factshift.com. I probably won't learn all of the things that are possible. There are trillions of things possible. Our brains process more time than we experience. Usually we bundle our time concepts up into some sort of abstract entity, whatever. Usually we turn our thoughts into some idea of something similar to words. We think with symbols or markers. We have experiences that we can return to consistently, and we don't always simulate these experiences when we move them around. Sometimes to structure belief, sometimes as we structure our beliefs, we create implications that change the ways other concepts can be structured. If you spend time writing a programming language, like developing one from scratch, then you understand where your computer makes the decisions when to acknowledge language. Your computer can make optimizations about how it moves its understanding around its own body. Hundreds of thousands of people have spent millions of dollars exploring the concept of an LLVM. This standardizes the general instruction set so you can create a language that works with multiple different architectures. If you don't use something like LLVM, then you can learn why there are so many different types of architectures and the implications of language on those individual architectures. If you learn C, you can understand programs written by people who have embodied cognition and recorded their understanding of a concept using this language. If you relate to the interpretation of these constructs, then physically your brain creates structures that enable these concepts to emerge in other contexts. This is circuitry very similar to electrical engineering, and literally the electrical signals, the ways that you can model this network of information, has physics to it. So when you learn to code, you are learning physics, and when you structure physics, you're exploring the consequence of those relationships, which creates math. It creates systems that can be associated with a mathematical grammar. With this, you can use code to learn math and physics, and you can use a website generator to create code. So if you start making a website, then you can segue into learning math and physics. I've been working with a lot of non-technical people, trying to understand where making websites becomes complex. Now that I have this understanding, I can help people through the parts of it that they don't quite want to, or they don't grasp yet. I would recommend learning how to structure language. What if the only thing I put on my website were a video? What if that video were a website? What if I hand animate that video? What if I split that animation up into timely interactions? What if I run those timely interactions through AI? What if I have a production process that requires me to hand animate any feature that I add to my website? What if I market other people's websites while I do this? That's an interesting concept. Right now I'm 10 days behind on this concept, but the idea is that I would draw a new frame every day. Then at the end of the year, I should have an animated website. The sun's going down. Not permanently, it'll be back tomorrow. Now I gotta do different stuff though. During the day, I record content, and then at night, I edit it. It's kind of a simplification. I'm trying to describe a relationship to coding now that AI can do the stuff that seemed like it was the hard part. I noticed that I'm more logically productive at night. I noticed that it's easier for me to code at night, so that's the task that I generally try to do. During the day, I try to emphasize creating content that I can sort through later. I know sometimes I'm going to want to sleep on the ideas that I have, so I have a backlog as well. I want to tell good stories. Also, remain grounded. I want to ground my relationships and share engagement. One of my relationships is with time. First, I draw an interface. Then I use tracing paper to mark the features and bring those into other media. I use the MD5 hashing algorithm to name the words, and then on those pages, I can create a simulation that other people could access. And there are a lot of things that can be done here. For example, I can mark something on one of these squares or rectangles, and then use that to represent something that shows up on the interface. So that would be the first column, third node. Learn calculus. Integration results in a constant. Right now we're integrating new technology. This new technology has changed the amount that we can accurately communicate with each other. Now I can make art, upload it to ChatGPT, ask it for a summary, verify that summary, and then send that art to someone when I know that my message is clear. Software engineering is a discipline that is relative to the amount of communication humans want to do without software. If humans want to do 99 out of 100 things themselves, software engineering is doing that one thing consistently. So there's always going to be a need for people who can do the stuff that no one else wants to do, and you should learn calculus. Then you can keep up with the changes. My most recent content workflow is to improvise while the lighting is good. I try to change my scenery so people don't think that I'm AI. These days, that's an uphill battle. For the most part, the things that I relate to are things that I think that I can do, and there are a lot of things that AI does that I can't do. If I buy a physical product like a pen and then use that in my art, I might know things about that product and the ways that it combines with other things that is unique to that structure. I'm thinking about a Pilot Precise V5 pen. I know that those pens smudge when I add water. Micron pens don't do this. If I create art with both a Micron pen and a Precise V5 pen, I know that I can create art that has a very specific physical reaction when I add water to it. This is an important concept. I need to organize my art, which is embarrassingly messy. The barriers are that my art is literally software. It's hardware in that it physically exists, but also it relates to itself and is hardware, hardware and software. My ecosystem relates to itself the way that computer programs can write themselves sometimes. So when I imagine organizing my art, I think of refactoring a code base, and the amount of momentum, or inertia I should say, the amount of inertia that goes into refactoring a code base daunts me. I'm often in the mood to explore storytelling, and it's easier for me to do tasks when they're oriented along that frame of intent. Sometimes when I'm planning on telling a story, I focus on the possibilities, and I can do thousands of things in an hour. Knowing that I can tap into this hyper-focus sometimes causes me to procrastinate because I wait for the moment when I can do thousands of things per hour. There are specific circumstances that make it possible for me to reach this kind of hyper-focus, and that takes planning. It requires me to structure my environment to be able to. Personally, I believe that ADHD and autism are labels that are with respect to a certain societal response to different neurotypes. So fundamentally, as we find new language to describe these experiences, the culture with which they are in reference to, the culture changes, and the experience of having a neurotype and needing to navigate social circumstances will change as well. Depression and anxiety are ways to be neurodivergent, so I don't like saying the ways that I structure my stuff is for neurodivergence, because that's not necessarily a meaningful term. But you can see the kinds of calculations that I do and see if you relate to the reasons that these decisions are desirable but difficult. I have a domain, stinky.singles, and I'm planning on using that to describe how I apply intent. My mess embarrasses me and influences my relationships. That's something that I want to change. Also, it's very difficult. Also, I do things that are very difficult. Buds, we need to stabilize software engineering. One of the really cool things about where we are is that there are a lot of tools that can be used for a lot of things, but one of the challenges is that now it's really challenging to communicate what those are. And engineers who have been doing this for a while do things to make certain abstractions easier to communicate, but then the new generation has a hard time figuring out what they actually need to know from the fundamentals. A lot of the tools that exist today were meant to solve a very specific problem, while the underlying technologies were meant to solve broader problems. And it's really good to know how to solve specific problems, but we also need to understand how those intersect with novel ideas. Because once those specific problems are solved, then that entire pool kind of dries up. And the pattern that is not sustainable is how little we train junior engineers to succeed at their jobs. A lot of companies are hesitant to get juniors onboarded because they think that it's going to take a long time, and instead, they spend a long time looking for the perfect candidate, which might take months. And once they find the perfect candidate, that candidate is probably qualified enough to be able to find other positions. So they aren't necessarily saving money by hiring somebody who's more expensive, and they aren't necessarily saving time by not hiring junior engineers. Sometimes they do, often they do, which is why it's tempting to have that pattern persist. And once you have people hired, it's really hard to know what the alternative would have been like. So I'm not going to say anything that tries to address specifically those problems because they're so complex and it really depends on the industry and company that you're trying to work for. What I can do is describe how I would recognize somebody who is genuinely interested and capable of learning how to succeed in the field. I'm doing that in subtle ways by building lore.land and showing you the process that I'm going through and the things that I value. But if you want more specific instruction on how to enter this new era of technology, because now we have AI tools that make it a little bit harder to value the things that we have in terms of knowing, how do I say this? AI tools are good at coding, but not good at software engineering, which is why entry-level positions are going to have a hard time in the near future. And if you want more guidance on how to navigate that space, then I can help you with that on my Patreon, @Splashy. I don't think that they have an @ sign in their usernames. I'm not going to make another take of this video. Currently, you can't buy washi tape on my website. Sometimes I have that product listed. I mostly market my digital media business, but physical products can ground connection. You can get a free roll of washi tape if you buy a website today. Today is January 9th, 2025. It seems like the US has 10 more days of TikTok. If that weren't the case, I would have spent longer introducing this product. It takes time for most people to make purchasing decisions, so I like to take time introducing them. Soon, I'll show you how to create a custom shop component for your website. I use JavaScript and React for this. You can use just HTML and CSS if you want to. Splashy.com. First I draw an interface. Then I use tracing paper to mark the features, and bring those into other media. I use the MD5 hashing algorithm to name the words, and then on those pages I can create a simulation that other people could access. And there are a lot of things that can be done here. For example, I can mark something on one of these squares or rectangles, and then use that to represent something that shows up on the interface. So that would be the first column, third node